I sat on the bus, staring absent-mindedly at the raindrops sliding down the window, the doctor's words echoing in my mind. Late-stage brain cancer. At most I have 3 months. My hand instinctively moved to dial a familiar number. When the call connected, a man's voice, smooth yet cold, came through the line. "What's the matter?" I nervously gripped the medical report, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my lips. "Nothing. I was just wondering if you could come home today and keep me company." His voice turned even colder. "I've told you many times, don't call me unless it's urgent." I heard his irritation mixed with the sound of a woman's soft, breathy sigh, and my heart tightened. My fingers, still gripping the phone, went white as I whispered, "Sorry to bother you." The call ended abruptly with the sound of a dial tone. I sat there in a daze, unable to put the phone down. I gazed at my reflection in the window, my face already streaked with tears. The truth was, I knew Adrian didn't love me. I was fully aware of the women who constantly surrounded him, but I never had the courage to confront him. I admit I'm weak. I was afraid that if I exposed the truth, I wouldn't even be able to hold on to the last 3 months of this marriage. "Sophia is getting a divorce. You know what to do." Adrian had changed into his clothes and walked toward me, his voice cold. I slowly lifted my head, gazing deeply at him, my eyes unable to hide the sadness and despair within. I whispered, "Do you want to divorce me?" My sorrowful gaze pierced Adrian's heart, causing a dull ache in his chest. His cold, stern face showed a hint of impatience. "You owe Sophia." In my eyes there was nothing but dead silence. I tightly clenched my fist, feeling blood slowly seep through my skin. I whispered, "What about me? Don't you owe me anything? I'll give you a large divorce settlement, but don't think for a second that you'll get anything else." Adrian's words were sharp as he turned to walk away. But I grabbed his sleeve. "I'm willing to divorce you as long as you promise me one thing. Play along with me for 3 months. Be a husband who loves me. Hold my hand, hug me, love me like ordinary couples do." I spoke the last 2 words so softly that they were almost inaudible. Adrian, however, heard every word, and a deep, intense disgust rose within him. "You're hopeless. I told you when we got married I'll never love you." After Adrian left, my stomach churned, and the physical pain mixed with the overwhelming emotional agony. I collapsed in the living room, crying uncontrollably. I swallowed a handful of red and green pills, my mind swirling in a haze, and my vision became a blur as tears stained everything in front of me. That night, I lay on the wide bed, a dull ache throbbing in my head. A tall figure walked into the room, pulled the blanket back, and pressed down on me forcefully. "What were you doing at the hospital with Leonard?" Adrian's voice was accusatory. His large hands wandered restlessly over my body. My body trembled and I pushed his hand away, uncomfortable. Adrian furrowed his brows. In the next moment he flipped over and pinned my wrist down, looking at me coldly. "Got some guts, huh? You dare to reject me?" My vision blurred and I struggled to endure the pain in my wrist, whispering, "Adrian, I'm not feeling well." As my vision cleared, fear gripped my heart. I was losing sight. Adrian looked at my confused gaze, mistaking it for a form of seduction, his eyes filled with ridicule. "What's wrong? Did Leonard not satisfy you?" "No, ugh." I couldn't explain before he punished me without hesitation. Afterward, a metallic taste flooded my mouth. I collapsed onto the bed, hiding the crimson stain in the pillow. Adrian stood up, dressing in his clothes, coldly eyeing me as I lay there like a lifeless fish. He looked utterly disgusted. "Remember, don't associate with any shady people." I lay limp on the bed, my mind replaying how Adrian had been so anxious over Sophia today. A sharp pain pierced my heart. I had given him the best years of my youth, never once crossing the line. But he, always surrounded by women, had countless affairs. In the end, it was I who was unfaithful and disloyal. The next morning, for the first time, a guest entered the grand hall. "Cousin, as long as you divorce Adrian, I won't hold the past against you," Sophia said, sitting on the sofa, still as beautiful as ever. I looked pale, no longer as stunning as before. I glanced at Sophia with a faint expression. "It was you who drugged the wine I drank with him, wasn't it? You never intended to marry Adrian." Sophia's innocent eyes hid a deep cunning. "The past is over now. Adrian's heart belongs to me. You saw it yesterday. When I had a little stomach ache, he nearly tore the entire hospital apart to take care of me." Sure enough, Sophia didn't deny it. I had suspected it 4 years ago but couldn't bring myself to believe it. Now everything became clear. Back then, the Aurelius family wasn't as large as it is now. Sophia didn't want to marry Adrian, so she drugged him, orchestrating a scene where Adrian was made to look like he had betrayed her. Afterward, she dramatically married Victor, the eldest son of the Victorian family, a leading public company. So what? As long as I'm Mrs. Song, you'll always be the mistress. Now that everything was clear, I no longer held back with Sophia. Sophia's face faltered slightly, but then she smiled. You understand Adrian better than I do. He would never let the woman he loves suffer. I hope you won't regret this. I calmly saw Sophia out. As I thought about her words, my body swayed with exhaustion. Soon Sophia's words came true. On her way home she had a car accident, and the car that hit her was from Lysander Enterprises. In the dead of night, Adrian called me to the hospital where I learned the details. Cousin, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have made you angry, Sophia weakly spoke from the hospital bed. Adrian stared at me, his eyes cold. Why did you have someone hit her? If I say I didn't, would you believe me? I looked at Adrian's ice-cold gaze and gave a self-mocking smile. How could he believe me? Seeing my reaction, Adrian's face darkened as he pulled me out of the room. Let's see if you have the guts to admit it. Just then a strong, firm voice rang out from not far down the hall. It was I who had the car hit her. Following the voice, I saw an elderly man standing in the hallway, his hair gray, his affectionate gaze falling on me. My nose tingled and my pale lips parted slightly. Grandfather. You've suffered, my child, George said sincerely. Sophia's throat tightened, unable to say a word. I had once been a young lady of the Lysander family, never shedding a tear, never knowing what it felt like to be wronged. Now I had chosen the man I loved, endured suffering, and been wronged time and again. I had become accustomed to it. Afterward, George scolded Adrian for being so blind as to blame me, the loyal wife, for a woman who had already been divorced. George also investigated the car accident and found out that it had been entirely staged by Sophia. Adrian, upon learning this, said nothing. I knew Adrian well. There was no way he didn't know that Sophia had deliberately caused the car accident. He just chose to remain indifferent. Sophia was right. When Adrian loved someone, he would never let them suffer. A bitter feeling surged within me once again. For the following week, Adrian didn't return home. Meanwhile, I was undergoing chemotherapy at the hospital, with Leonard staying by my side, watching with a heavy heart as my long, beautiful hair fell to the ground. Am I ugly? I asked Leonard, leaning back against the pillow. You're the most beautiful girl, Leonard replied softly. The word girl. A fleeting light flashed in my eyes before quickly fading. Leonard, could you buy me a wig? Preferably one that looks like my original hair. I didn't want Adrian to see how hideous I had become. Of course, Leonard said, knowing exactly what I was thinking and unable to refuse. In the afternoon, I wore the wig and put on some light makeup to cover the pallor on my face. It was almost impossible to tell that I had been through chemotherapy. Leonard drove me home, kindly draping his scarf around my neck, reminding me, the weather's getting cold, take care of your health. It was only after his car had driven away that I entered the villa. The chill in the hall was unmistakable. As I stepped in, I immediately saw the man sitting on the sofa. You've been gone so long. I thought you weren't coming back. Had enough fun. The cold, filthy words came from Adrian's mouth like a bucket of ice water, instantly extinguishing the flicker of hope I had. Adrian saw that I was silent and strode over, easily pinning me against the wall. He whispered in my ear, it's only been a few days since I left and you're already with that lawyer? You're that desperate. His words made my heart freeze and I gritted my teeth trying to clarify. Leonard and I are innocent. But Adrian, hearing this, shoved his hands under my clothes and I trembled at the touch. Remembering the doctor's warnings, I grabbed his hand and begged, please don't. The doctor had told me that after chemotherapy, my body couldn't endure such things, and being with Adrian could be life-threatening. Are you afraid Leonard will abandon you? Adrian's fury was evident in his eyes as he looked at the scarf around my neck. He then dragged me to the bathroom, repeatedly tormenting me in the most degrading manner. Looking at myself in the mirror, I felt like the lowest of the low, stripped of all dignity. In my mind, a string snapped and I felt a searing pain. Blood spilled from my mouth, staining the mirror in deep crimson. The bright red stain sharply pierced Adrian's nerves. He lifted me from the sink counter, a flash of panic crossing his eyes. What happened? I looked into his eyes, where a fleeting change stirred within. The ice that had been buried deep within me began to crack slightly, and I forced a smile. This is a blood bag I prepared. So you'll feel sorry for me, right? Seeing that I was unharmed and wiping my mouth, Adrian's anger flared up. He yelled, you really will do anything for my attention. With that, he grabbed his jacket and left without a second thought. I watched his retreating figure, leaning against the sink to steady myself. Even I couldn't believe that such a clumsy excuse had worked on him. As his silhouette grew fainter, my gaze slowly darkened. I couldn't tell if it was tears or blood blurring my vision. My body swayed, barely holding on to the last shred of life. I dialed Leonard's number. Help me. When Leonard arrived, we were on our way to the hospital. I had completely lost my sight sitting in the passenger seat, my eyes hollow. The man beside me took my hand. I've contacted the best neurosurgeons. We're going abroad immediately. They'll cure you. I leaned back weakly in the seat, my voice barely a whisper. Give me 2 more months, please. There's something I want to finish. After 2 months, I'll go abroad with you. Leonard looked at my frail body with anger. Don't you know, in 2 months your cancer will have spread completely and surgery will be meaningless. I nodded apologetically, saying, just one last time, let me be selfish. After this, I won't do it again. Leonard paused, his eyes reddening as he looked out the window, unable to say a word. A few days later, I regained some vision, though now my eyes were as blurry as an elderly person's, no longer as clear as before. Afraid Adrian might find me, I rushed home after being discharged. The villa looked the same as it had days ago, a mess. The bathroom mirror still bore dark red stains from the blood. He hadn't come back. A sharp pain struck my chest, and silently I began cleaning the house, taking out the trash in the rain. Afterward, I stood outside the empty, lonely villa, my face covered with tears mixed with rainwater, my throat thick with bitterness. Late that night, I heard footsteps and realized too late that Adrian had returned. I watched him quietly, his figure no longer clear, as though veiled in a gray filter. You're back. I'll go make you some tea. I barely got to my feet when Adrian placed a document in front of me, the words, divorce agreement, glaring at me. He couldn't wait to divorce me, could he? Adrian looked at me with a disgusted expression. She's in bad shape. Victor wants to remarry her, but he's been abusing her. She's still in the hospital and needs an identity. She referred to Sophia. My back stiffened as I raised my head to look at him, longing to ask him. If he couldn't bear to let Sophia suffer, why was he so heartless towards me? Adrian met my sorrowful gaze and threw the agreement onto the table. Sign it. This is what I owe her. A bitter smile lingered on my lips. I won't sign the agreement unless you promise me one thing. Love me just once. Had it not been for you, Sophia wouldn't have been hurt. Adrian's words were like a knife, and my heart, already shattered, felt the pain all over again. I fought back the injustice inside me, staring at Adrian's cold, stern face, and word by word I asked, was it I who forced Sophia to marry? Was it I who forced her to divorce? Was it I who made her husband abuse her? Was it I who pushed her to seduce my husband? Before I could finish, I heard a sharp slap as a harsh slap landed on my face. Adrian had used all his strength and I fell to the floor, my ears ringing. The world around me seemed to quiet down. With red, swollen eyes, I looked at him in disbelief. For the first time in 10 years, he slapped me, and it was because of Sophia. Adrian's gaze lingered on the red mark on my cheek. His right hand trembled slightly. He avoided my gaze and said in a low voice, if you won't sign this agreement, I'll make sure you do. With that, he turned and walked away. I staggered to my feet, trying to swallow my tears, muttering to myself, do you really think Sophia left because of betrayal? She left for power, for status. She never truly loved you. How could you not know? A few days later, the news was broadcast on TV. The president of the Aurelius family, Adrian, recently used the power of the Aurelius family to suppress the Victorian family over the abuse incident involving Sophia, the ex-wife of the Victorian family's eldest son, Victor, and sent him to prison. It said that Adrian and Sophia were childhood sweethearts who, for various reasons, separated but are now reunited. Reunited lovers. A cold emptiness filled my heart. Our marriage had always been kept secret. And now, in front of the whole world, Adrian had revealed that he was with a divorced woman. I curled up on the sofa, feeling my life slowly slipping away. The belief that had kept me going was fading. In the afternoon, George, the elder, came over. He was furious. He doesn't even care about me. How dare he let the media report something so shameless? I quietly made him tea. George noticed my pale face and looked puzzled. You need to take care of yourself, get some rest. My hand trembled as I responded softly. My heart was filled with bitterness. Even Grandpa could see how bad my health was, yet the husband I spent every day with hadn't noticed. Or maybe he truly didn't care. Sophia's no good. I've investigated, and she's been involved with men everywhere over the last 4 years. She's the kind of woman who would drive any man mad. A sense of desolation spread in my eyes. Even Grandpa, with his resources, could find out the truth so easily, yet Adrian chose to ignore it. The Victorian family is falling apart now. She's getting out fast, holding on to Adrian, and won't let go. I won't let such a scheming woman into the Aurelius family. George added. I didn't listen to his words any longer. Suddenly, a sense of relief washed over me. Grandpa, I want to divorce Adrian. The words, divorce, felt like a heavy weight coming out of my mouth. What did you say? Grandpa looked horrified. I knew he wasn't just worried about himself. He was concerned about Lysander Enterprises. The Lysander family used to be a prestigious family, no worse than the Aurelius family. But after my parents passed away, the family had begun to decline. Yet even so, the Lysander family still held immense wealth. I've already transferred all the shares of Lysander Enterprises to Adrian. I'm willing to leave with nothing. Grandpa looked at me, filled with shame. He didn't understand. What are you trying to achieve by doing this? What else is there left for me? All along I've only wanted him. I had always thought that this villa was my last sanctuary, but when I returned from my second chemotherapy session and saw Sophia in the living room, I realized that even the last piece of peace in my marriage was gone. All of this furniture needs to be replaced, Sophia instructed the movers. Don't move anything, I said coldly, standing in the doorway. Sophia turned to look at me, a smug smile on her face. Cousin, from now on this will be Adrian's and my home. I'll decorate it however I want and you have no say in it. I watched as she quickly asserted her control and couldn't help but mock her. You're not even married to Adrian yet. I'm still his wife and you, a mistress, have no right to act so arrogantly in my home. The movers exchanged confused glances at my words. Sophia's face darkened and she raised an eyebrow. It's only a matter of time. Don't speak so confidently, you might end up embarrassing yourself, I retorted. Sophia's smile twisted into something more sinister. Is that so? Let's see about that. Before I understood her intentions, I saw Sophia grab a fruit knife from the table, seize my hand and cut her own wrist with it. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you crazy? Sophia pulled the knife away, raised her hand and smiled at me. Adrian will be back soon. Let's see who he'll care about first. Sure enough, I heard footsteps approaching. With a loud clang, Sophia threw the knife on the floor and collapsed onto the ground, tears rolling down her face. Cousin, it hurts. It really hurts. I stood there, frozen, watching her perform her act with a look of contempt in my eyes. I was the young lady of the Lysander family. Even if I was wronged, I would never stoop to such despicable tricks. Sophia, are you all right? Adrian rushed into the hall, almost throwing himself at her as he held her tightly. Not once did he look at me. My heart bled as I watched the man I loved embrace another woman, and I couldn't even find the words to express the feeling inside. Isla, you wait here. Adrian carried Sophia away, throwing down one last cold remark before leaving. Watching him hurry off, I suddenly wanted to scream. Adrian, how long are you going to stay blind to the truth? A few days later, I was at the company preparing for a handover. I didn't want Adrian to take over the mess that Sophia had created after I died. My assistant hurried in looking frantic. Isla, all of the company's projects have been cancelled overnight. The board called an emergency meeting and wants you to attend. I dropped everything I was doing and rushed to the conference room. By the time I arrived, the room was already filled with people. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, staring at the man sitting at the head of the table, feeling a sharp pain in my chest. Adrian's hands were clasped on the table and he coldly looked at me. The meeting began, and it quickly became clear that the so-called emergency was merely his tactic to force me into a divorce. He was using the Lysander family to threaten me, unaware that I had already handed over everything to him. Miss Isla, if you admit to infidelity and agree to the divorce, the Lysander family will remain intact, said Sophia's mother, my aunt. Miss Isla, the Lysander family has lost so much under Mr. Adrian's management. We can't forget our roots. Only if you admit to infidelity will Mr. Adrian and Sophia's reputation be spared, my uncle added. I staggered slightly, turning to look at the man sitting at the head of the table. Admit to infidelity? Was this your decision? Adrian's brows furrowed slightly. To protect Sophia's reputation, he had to do this. As long as you agree, I'll make sure the Lysander family is safe, he said, his words as sharp as knives. I felt the last trace of love I had for him slip away. I never thought he could be this heartless. Not only was he forcing me to divorce him, but now he was also asking me to create a false narrative and admit to infidelity in our marriage. So much for the man I loved. Admit to infidelity? Then let me ask you, Mr. Adrian, when did I cheat and with whom? I spoke with a hollow sadness. Do you really want me to spell it out? Adrian pulled out a stack of photos and scattered them across the table. The photos showed me and Leonard looking like ordinary friends. There was nothing inappropriate about it. But no one in the room spoke up for me. Agree, Miss Isla. Do you really want your parents' legacy, the company they built, to be destroyed by your own hands? You stole Sophia's groom back then. Now it's time to return him. You should think of the shareholders in the room. The pressure mounted, crushing my nerves. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. This was my family. Everything was fake in the face of self-interest. Fine, I agree. I'll sign the divorce. I gazed deeply at Adrian, and after a long silence I finally spoke with a bitter tone. I only wish for you to get what you want in life and never regret it. Then I signed the divorce agreement and walked away, leaving everything behind. It was all over. I had carefully guarded a 4-year marriage and the person who had always remained in my heart. In order to avoid dragging Leonard into this mess, I agreed to go to M Hotel with Adrian in a few days, where his people would set up a fake affair. Marriages can't always be hidden from the world, and this staged affair was his way of protecting himself. If the media ever reported on my marriage to Adrian, Sophia would be seen as the third party and be condemned by everyone. He had planned it all out for her so thoroughly. But then again, since I was going to die anyway, why should I care about my reputation? Agreeing to this was just my way of putting a final period on this fruitless marriage. But fate had other plans. On that day my condition worsened and I suddenly collapsed, unable to get up. In my final moments I pressed the first number in my phone. When the call connected, Adrian's cold voice came through. "Where are you? Don't play games with me, you know I can make things happen." How badly I wanted to tell him I couldn't go, but no sound would come from my throat. My fingers hovered over the name in the phone, my vision blurry. 3 days later, I was revived and the person by my side was Leonard. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved back to the Lysander family's old house. One day I stood on the balcony feeling the cold wind blow through. My frail, bony hand moved slightly, barely an inch. Just a small movement. It was then that Adrian arrived at the Lysander family's old house. For the first time I felt how cruel Adrian truly was. To tear a person apart psychologically, how little did he care about me to do this? Knowing I loved him so deeply, yet so brazenly walking up to me and telling me that he was getting married. Adrian threw a wedding invitation directly at me and said, "I'm going to have a grand wedding for Sophia to make up for the sins you committed." I looked at the invitation on my lap, then lifted my gaze to him, my eyes trembling slightly. "Sin? My biggest sin in this life was loving you." Adrian's brows furrowed even tighter, a look of disdain rising in his eyes. "You really know how to find excuses for yourself." Without missing a beat he mocked me. "You think pretending to be miserable will make me feel something? You're so thin and ghostly, who would want you?" Hearing his words, my throat tightened, but I forced a smile. "I don't need anyone to like me." "Then why did you want me to be a husband who loved you, to hold your hand, hug you and love you like ordinary couples?" Adrian seemed determined to poke at the pain in my heart, not backing down until he got his answer. I parted my pale lips slightly. "I wanted to say it because I loved you, but now I couldn't love you anymore." "Did I hate you?" "Yes, probably." But the words got stuck in my throat and I swallowed them back. Instead I said faintly, "That was just a casual remark with no real meaning." Just these few words drained all of my energy. If there's another life, I'll never love him again. I'll love myself and my family instead. Adrian turned and left without a second glance. Not long after he left, the sound of an ambulance echoed through the Lysander family's old house. I was covered with various medical devices, an oxygen mask on my face, and my hand tightly clutching the wedding invitation. Leonard grasped my hand, tears streaming down his face. He kept whispering in my ear, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." I opened my eyes slightly, barely able to see him, and with all the strength I had left, I pushed the wedding invitation into his hand, wanting to speak but unable to make a sound. Leonard gently kissed my hand, his body trembling. "Don't say anything more." I shook my head weakly, reaching up to remove the oxygen mask. Leonard's eyes were red, unwilling to let me leave with any regrets. With long, careful fingers he removed the mask himself. "Please take everything related to the Lysander family and give it to him. Also attend his wedding for me, tell him I don't hate him anymore." But those last 4 words, I had no strength left to say. My hand, still holding Leonard's, fell limply, and the red invitation dropped to the floor with a sharp, glaring contrast. Beep. The harsh sound of the heart monitor echoed. The line on the ECG had turned into a straight line, without a single fluctuation. Adrian's wedding took place in a grand and solemn church. He stood tall in his custom suit, full of confidence. 4 years had passed and now he had finally made up for his past mistakes. It was time for him to be happy. In the church, Sophia was wearing a stunning white wedding dress, radiant and graceful with a loving gaze in her eyes. But Adrian's eyes wandered around the church, unable to find that one hateful figure, his brow furrowing slightly. He had sent the invitation, and she had the audacity not to show up. At that moment the church doors opened. Leonard, dressed in a black suit with a white rose pinned to his chest, appeared in the church. "I'm Isla's lawyer, here to announce her will." Inside the European-style church, a deafening silence filled the air. The will. Adrian's confident face changed in an instant. Below the stage, Leonard held up the will. I, as the representative of Isla, will now read her will. He paused for a moment, his voice low and hoarse as he read. I am suffering from a terminal illness and have little time left. I hereby appoint lawyer Leonard as a witness and leave the following will. All of my real estate holdings and 40% of the shares in the Lysander family will be inherited by my ex-husband Adrian. Before he could finish, Adrian rushed down the stage and grabbed Leonard by the collar, his voice low and threatening. Where is she? In a place you will never find, Leonard replied coldly. In the next moment, Adrian swung a fist at Leonard. Leonard, unable to dodge in time, was knocked to the ground, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. A shocked murmur spread through the crowd. Adrian stood over the fallen man, his eyes filled with malice, but his voice dripped with mockery. Pretending to be pitiful won't work, now you're playing dead? Tell Isla, playing dead won't work with me. Tell her to come here immediately, or I swear if I find her, I'll make her wish she was never born. Leonard wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes cold, then quickly swung a punch at Adrian. You're a piece of trash, he spat through clenched teeth. His fist narrowly missed Adrian, whose face darkened, the atmosphere turning even more chaotic. No one expected that I would suddenly die. Security quickly escorted Leonard out, and Sophia rushed to Adrian's side, looking at him with concern. Adrian, are you okay? Adrian turned to face Sophia's beautiful face, and for a brief moment, Isla's face flashed before his eyes. Her face had been so pale just a few days ago with not a trace of color. He couldn't believe I was really gone. Sophia continued shaking his arm, calling his name, Adrian. Get off. Adrian shoved her away and stormed out of the church. Sophia stood frozen, her hand still outstretched in disbelief, watching Adrian's retreating figure. She took a step forward, wanting to chase him, but her legs felt as if they had rooted to the ground, unable to move. She turned to look at George. Grandfather, can you please call Adrian and tell him to come back for the wedding? With so many people present, if Adrian left like this, wouldn't she be the laughingstock? George looked at her coldly. Don't call me grandfather. You're not worthy. It seemed even George hadn't expected the sudden turn of events, nor how quickly I would pass. In the Aurelius family headquarters, in the president's office, Adrian, still in his luxurious suit, hadn't even taken it off, sitting in his office chair, surrounded by well-organized bodyguards standing at attention. Find Isla. Dig through the earth if you have to, but bring her to me. I refuse to believe she can hide forever. Yes, sir. As the bodyguards left, Adrian clenched his fists, his knuckles cracking. Isla, you better be dead, or if I find you I'll make sure. His eyes darkened as a dull ache settled deep in his chest. Outside the villa, Adrian's car slowly pulled up to the front of the house. He gazed out of the window, seeing the warm yellow light of the villa shining through. A sudden tightness gripped his chest, and without hesitation he quickly got out of the car and ran toward the door. He pushed it open and the light from inside spilled out. A woman came rushing toward him, her steps light and graceful. His gaze instantly darkened. Adrian, I had everything in the house rearranged. Do you like it? Sophia asked, beaming at him. Adrian stared at Sophia, then asked coldly, Leonard said Isla is dead. Do you believe him? Sophia froze for a moment, then casually reached for Adrian's clothes, nonchalantly responding, Death is irreversible. I'm also deeply saddened by her passing. Her hand moved to Adrian's chest and she breathed heavily. Adrian, you promised to give me shares after we marry. When will that happen? Adrian's face darkened further. He saw no trace of sorrow in her at all. He roughly pulled away from her. But we're not married. In fact, Isla and I were never divorced. It turned out that while I had signed the divorce agreement, the agreement didn't mean the divorce was final. Sophia's face froze in shock. What did you say? Adrian coldly looked at her. Did you divorce Victor because you were involved with his brother? Sophia's face went pale, her hands trembling as she quickly shook her head. No, Adrian, you have to believe me. Victor must be falsely accusing me from prison. Adrian didn't care whether she was involved with Victor's brother or not. He glanced at the unfamiliar villa and continued, Don't worry, I believe you. Sophia sighed in relief. Before she could fully settle, Adrian added, I'll personally investigate everything about you, including what happened 4 years ago. Until then. He noticed her face turn ashen and gave his command, Restore everything to its original state. Sophia struggled to regain her composure, but her clenched hands trembled involuntarily. The bodyguards found no records of any departure. They couldn't find me at all. To them, it was as if I had vanished off the face of the earth. Adrian sat on the couch, staring at the medical documents and death certificate sent from the hospital. The diagnosis clearly stated late-stage brain cancer, with another note confirming that I had lost hearing in my right ear due to external trauma. He stared at the papers, his hand trembling slightly, but he couldn't bring himself to believe that I was truly gone. Leonard handed him the transfer agreement. Sign it. I hope you'll take care of the Lysander family and cherish everything she left behind for you. Adrian looked at the transfer agreement and the will, his gaze unfocused. He looked up at Leonard's face, a face full of quiet contempt, and then he suddenly understood, letting out a laugh. Feigning death and using these things to distract me. She wanted me to feel guilty so she could be at ease with you, this pretty boy, living together. Leonard's eyes turned icy. I won't allow you to insult her like that. At that moment, Leonard felt sorrow for me. How could I have fallen for such a beast? Adrian ignored Leonard's furious glare and spoke slowly. Tell Isla it's not too late to come back to me. Otherwise I'll destroy everything. I always follow through on my promises. Adrian had always been a man of his word. The next morning, the national news reported. The once thriving Lysander Enterprises was now completely shut down. The demolition teams surrounded the building, waiting for Adrian's command to destroy it. Adrian repeatedly dialed my number, but it went unanswered. Destroy it. With a single word from him, the Lysander Enterprises building was blown up, crashing to the ground in a massive collapse. Everything I had entrusted to Adrian was destroyed by his own hands, not leaving a single trace behind. The outside world was filled with murmurs of disbelief. Some media outlets uncovered the truth about Adrian and Isla's marriage and made it the headline, sparking a frenzy of speculation. What kind of hatred could lead someone to destroy the only remaining asset left by their ex-wife? The world didn't know. Adrian didn't know either. He stood on the highest floor of the building waiting for me to apologize and lower my head to him. But deep down, his restless heart ached with an unbearable pain. At that moment, his assistant hurried in without taking a breath. Mr. Adrian, we've completed the investigation. It turns out that Sophia's divorce from Victor was indeed because she had an affair with his brother. When Victor found out, he forced the divorce. After the divorce, Victor's brother refused to marry her, so she... The assistant hesitated, unable to continue. Adrian's tall frame shuddered, fury rising in his eyes. Victor's brother had refused to marry her, so she came back to find him? What about what happened 4 years ago? Adrian forced down the anger seething inside him. The Victorian family's parents said that at the time, Victor was pursuing Sophia, and the Victorian family was doing the best in terms of prospects. Sophia didn't want to ask you to break off the engagement, and at the time, Isla had feelings for you. So, they drugged Isla and you to make things happen. The assistant's words hit Adrian like a crushing blow. His head rang, and for the first time his eyes began to burn with unshed tears. He had misunderstood. Mr. Adrian. The assistant's voice pulled Adrian out of the past. Adrian's defiant face showed for the first time a deep defeat. He looked at his assistant and asked gravely, did she know about this? For the first time in 4 years, he referred to me as Mrs. The assistant was equally stunned. He paused for a moment before answering, yes, she knew. From the time Miss Sophia returned, Mrs. Isla had already known. Then why didn't she tell me? Adrian asked, unsure if he was questioning the assistant or himself. The assistant remained silent, knowing that Adrian should understand the answer better than anyone. How could one love someone and yet hurt them so deeply? Release Victor. Let him deal with Sophia and her parents. Adrian commanded. A black business car stopped in front of the villa. 2 bodyguards pushed Sophia toward the car, but she desperately clung to Adrian's clothes, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. Adrian, I was wrong. I shouldn't have plotted against Isla. Please, spare me this time. Adrian remained unmoved. Sophia continued, Victor will kill me. Please don't hand me over to him. We've been together, haven't we? You'd better pray Isla is all right. If anything happens to her, not only will Victor kill you, but I will too. Adrian said with a terrifying ferocity. Sophia froze under his chilling gaze, her heart sinking with fear. No, it's impossible. Don't you remember what you said when I saved you? You said you would never hurt me, that you would love me and protect me for life. She clung to Adrian with the last of her strength. Look at my hands, they're still covered in scars. If it weren't for saving you, my dream of playing the piano would never have been shattered. Adrian's gaze lingered on the scars on her hands, and his eyes trembled slightly. 10 years ago, a rival company had kidnapped him over a business deal. After he escaped, injured, it was Sophia who saved him. At the time, he was unconscious, and Sophia played him music every day to soothe him. Once he woke up, she never played the piano again. Her hands were destroyed when the kidnappers, seeking revenge, severed her tendons. Though she recovered in time, she could never play the piano again. Every time she touched it, the psychological trauma would overwhelm her. Adrian, have you forgotten how I played music for you every day so that you could sleep peacefully? Sophia continued as she watched Adrian's face change. The two bodyguards noticed the shift in Adrian's expression and dared not pull Sophia away any further. Adrian waved his hand, signaling for them to step back. Sophia felt a weight lift from her chest. Sophia, I'm letting you go this time, but it's the last time. There will be no more ties between us. You are never to appear in front of me again. This was his final act of mercy, not for Sophia, but for the girl who had once cared for him so attentively and played him songs every day. Sophia, fearing Adrian might change his mind, hurriedly left. After all, a man who treated his ex-wife so cruelly, she couldn't imagine what he might do once he learned the truth about her. After all, she had never even known how to play the piano. Adrian looked at the emptiness inside the villa. Even though Sophia had restored everything to its original state, Adrian couldn't find a single trace of me. After signing the divorce agreement, I had already moved out, leaving behind nothing. Adrian stood there, staring at the cold, desolate house, as though he could feel the loneliness of waiting alone every day. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. Keep a close watch on Leonard. As soon as you find out anything about my wife, let me know immediately. He knew Leonard was lying. Death, the will, the medical records, he couldn't care less about those lies. Adrian muttered to himself, Isla, once I find you, we'll live a good life. This time I won't let you suffer. 6 months later in City R. Isla's wedding was held at a luxurious private winery, attended by most of the high society. Surprisingly, Adrian appeared at the wedding uninvited. But no one noticed him. After all, no one expected the Mr. Adrian, who had once been so meticulous about his appearance, to return after 6 months looking scruffy, with an unkempt beard and disheveled. In the makeup room, a girl in her early 20s, arm in arm with the bride, coquettishly said, Sis, don't forget to toss the bouquet to me later. Got it, I won't toss it, I'll just hand it to you directly. The bride looked at me affectionately. Yes, this girl in her 20s is me, Isla. I almost died on the operating table. After an emergency surgery, Leonard took me to France for treatment. Although I recovered well, I lost my memory. With Leonard and my sister's doting care, I forgot all the painful things from before. At the wedding, I wore a pristine white gown, my fair hands moving gracefully over the piano keys, playing the wedding music. At that moment, Adrian's chest heaved as he ran frantically toward the piano stage. Seeing him, I felt an inexplicable panic deep within me. Suddenly, his voice was hoarse as he tightly hugged me, as if trying to merge me into his very bones. My heart skipped a beat, as if something hidden deep inside was about to explode. The whole venue was silent. No one had expected what was unfolding on the stage. My sister, in her wedding dress, rushed over, her face full of worry. Adrian, how could you be here? Adrian carefully touched my face, as if afraid this was all just a dream. He slowly lowered his head, and we were so close that our lips were about to meet. Suddenly, I tensed and raised my hand, slapping him across the face. Pervert! I pushed him away and hurriedly fled to my hotel room. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about the man at my sister's wedding. He looked so sad. Who is he? Why did he know me? Every time I thought about it, my head would ache. Just then a knock came at the door. I got up and opened it. I saw Leonard standing in the doorway in a sharp suit, drenched in rain. He had just gotten off the plane when he received my sister's call. He hadn't expected that, even after hiding me for half a year, Adrian had still found me. He stared at me deeply, seeing the color returning to my face, then pulled me into his arms. Leonard, what's wrong? I asked, leaning against his chest, confused. You're soaked, let me get you some clothes. Leonard's throat tightened and he hugged me even tighter. Gently kissing my hair, he could no longer hold back the words he had kept inside for years. Isla, will you marry me? Let me guard you for the rest of your life.